Our story about the opening of Walt Disney World is not focused only on the events that led to its first day, but also how, after the death of Walt Disney, the Florida project signaled a changing of the guard within the Disney company. In part, this played out as a power shift between park operations, led by Dick Nunis, and WED, overseen by Dick Irvine. But also the opening of the Florida resort signaled a moment when Roy Disney would step aside and hand the company over to younger executives such as Card Walker and Don Tatum, with the hope that after 5 years of development, he was able to leave the Florida resort as a strong company project for others to manage. But in each of these arrangements, a number of problems have already developed and will continue to develop as our story unfolds today. Quite simply, no project of this size is ever without unforeseen difficulties that end up changing the people who work on it. And now it's the middle of September 1971, and this is part 5. By the end of the third week of September, the State Department of Transportation had a firm plan as to how to manage traffic on public highways and state roads when the resort opened. To observe traffic patterns, they were constructing a temporary helicopter landing pad next to I-4, a few miles north of the Disney property. Beyond aerial observation, state officials were assembling, quote, movable signs, trucks loaded with cones to cone off lanes when needed, and assigning Florida Highway Patrol troopers at the entrance to Disney World and the Turnpike interchange east of Kissimmee. This plan would give officers resources to manage fluid traffic routing situations during the resort's early weeks. Out on the roads themselves, workers erected new signs that directed tourists to the recently expanded Highway 192, as most printed maps did not yet contain clear directions to the resort. The green and white roadside signs also held the phrase Disney World, though these words remained under a temporary covering of plastic and tape and wouldn't be uncovered until early morning hours on October 1st. In the week before opening, Disney reported that it was receiving, quote, more than 200 inquiries per day from guests seeking future accommodations at the Polynesian, Contemporary, and campgrounds which were not yet complete. The Disney phone lines were also taking reservations for a Motor Inn Plaza in Lake Buena Vista, which was arranged as both an overflow hotel and a hotel for those seeking more modest accommodations than those on-property options that started at $22 per night. But 200 phone inquiries per day were not nearly enough to fill the 1,000 rooms Disney would manage once both hotels were finished. This, too, was an indicator that the initial wave of interest might not be as large as those predictions touted in papers up and down the East Coast. Among executives, one of the main concerns, in addition to satisfying guests, was to create a public image of the resort that would support the price of Disney's stock. Over the previous 5 years, the stock had not only benefited from a 2-for-1 split, but had also risen from $20 to $110 per share. A person who had invested $1,000 in 1966 would now own over $10,000 in stock, a tremendous increase in just 5 years. The rise in stock price was largely attributable to two underlying factors. First, the death of Walt Disney, which at least for some investors meant that business people, likely more focused on profit, would soon run the company. And second, the belief that Walt Disney World would be a success and quickly turn a profit. But this second factor was about to be tested. Quote, beginning right now, one analyst said, the expectations must become realities. All Disney executives knew that perhaps even more than a fully functioning resort, the Magic Kingdom needed to appear as a success or as a likely success to reporters whose articles would influence financial reports. Anything less would deeply damage the price of Disney stock and, by extension, the value of the Disney company. The opening date also signaled a change within the company. For Disney, the fiscal year started on October 1st and ended on September 30th. It was no coincidence that Disney selected October 1st as the opening date, as income derived from the resort could be placed into an upcoming fiscal report, hopefully showing a clear increase in revenue year over year from the previous fiscal period. In terms of financial reporting, it would clearly delineate company revenue levels before and after the opening of the resort. Inside the company, Roy had already indicated that he would soon move into at least partial retirement, reducing the time he spent in the office. The lead up to the opening and the tremendous stock gains over the previous 5 years would fall under Roy's watch. But after October 1st, any subsequent gains or losses would reflect more on younger executives, particularly Card Walker and Don Tatum, but also high-ranking individuals like Dick Nunis. In the final days before opening, Nunis and other Disney managers focused on finishing the Magic Kingdom. At least a dozen, perhaps more, attractions weren't yet ready for guests. Large areas needed landscaping, some buildings needed to be painted. WED designer Bill Justice recalled that the Bear Country Jamboree was significantly behind schedule. Quote, "They were still installing the carpet, painting, and putting seats in the theater," he said. And as for his work fine-tuning the animatronic figures, he explained that to avoid physical construction inside the theater, he could only fine-tune the show at night. Quote, "This was the last week of September," he added. On the weekend of September 24th through September 26th, partially to train more cast members with actual guests, the resort opened again for limited previews, this time to Disney employees and their families and/or dates. For one preview, Disney also invited employees of the Martin Marietta Company who had built the monorail trains that operated on the resort's Beamway. These were previews for full-scale operations, with the park open each night for 5 hours after most construction crews had left from 7 p.m. until midnight. Arriving an hour before sunset, employees parked in the same parking lot that customers would use the following Friday. They could take either a small sidewheel steamship or the monorail to the Magic Kingdom. At this time, the monorail passed through the Contemporary Hotel, which was still far from complete, though by 7 p.m. most construction workers had gone home for the night. One guest explained, quote, "There were scaffolds and cranes all around the hotel, and the landscaping was not completed there." After the monorail exited the Contemporary, guests saw in the distance, beyond the open dirt that skirted the hotel, the landscaped greenery in front of the Magic Kingdom. For many families, 5 hours was enough to have dinner and experience a half-dozen attractions. Tomorrowland remained closed off to visitors, as did smaller sections of every other land. Still, those areas that were open held lovely wonders. It's a Small World and the Haunted Mansion, of course, were still operating. They were joined by the Tropical Serenade, the Jungle Cruise, the Mickey Mouse Revue, the Swiss Family Robinson Treehouse, and a handful of Fantasyland dark rides, with the exception of Peter Pan's Flight. As employees and their guests enjoyed the park, and as newly hired cast members gained experience with actual guests, Dick Nunis, watching the event unfold around him, understood that this too would siphon hundreds, if not thousands, of potential visitors from attending the park's official opening weekend. Nunis understood that some people in the park, now that their curiosity was satisfied, wouldn't return the following weekend. In this, there was also another problem. As the park was not yet finished, for the last month, the Disney PR team had tried to keep reporters out of the Magic Kingdom so that their reviews would focus on a more finished park. But repeatedly, amidst the friends and family members, reporters found ways to walk themselves into the park, largely as guests of new cast members. Quote, "I had another opportunity at a sneak preview," one reporter wrote, "and each time I go, I am more delighted and thrilled. Everything is so beautiful." In the final days of construction, crews were focused wholly on areas visible to guests. Many back-of-the-house and office areas were temporarily abandoned as unfinished projects. Quote, "There was no paint on basement walls," Charlie Ridgway explained. "Offices over Main Street stores had bare bulbs on wires hanging from the ceiling and metal studs where walls would be." Tomorrowland, as it was so far behind schedule, was mostly given up as a lost cause for opening day, with an understanding that it would be better to have many finished or nearly finished areas and then one section that was essentially marked as opening soon. As time was now short, some problems were met with creative solutions to finish projects as fast as possible. When the three-story riverboat, named after Joe Fowler, was ready to move from dry dock, located a half-mile behind the Magic Kingdom, into the park, boat operators would need to take it through Bay Lake, under the monorail beam into Seven Seas Lagoon, and finally to the service canal behind Frontierland that led to Rivers of America. Only the water transportation team was unsure if the boat with its high smokestacks would pass beneath the monorail beam. From blueprints, they knew the exact height of the stacks above the waterline, but they didn't know the exact height of the beam above the water, as this was one section where the beam sloped down between two supports. To speed the process along, they decided to measure the beam height in person by tying a heavy bolt to the end of some fishing line and walking out onto the beamway. Quote, "We went up to the 4th floor of the Contemporary Resort," Ted Kellogg explained. "The monorail beams are about 3 feet wide, and we didn't think anything about it." 1 foot in front of the other, they walked on the open beam toward the air gate. Once outside, they could see that the ground, still nothing more than hard dirt, was 50 or more feet beneath them. They continued until they were above the water bridge that connected Bay Lake to Seven Seas Lagoon. They looked for the lowest spot, as this would be the section the paddle wheeler needed to clear. Once in position, they let down the line, marked the length, then returned, moving single file through the air gate into the Contemporary Hotel. Quote, "We stretched the line out on the floor," Kellogg added, "got a measuring tape and figured out how many feet to the water level." They learned that they would need to shorten the stacks for transport. The following day, with the crowns removed from the smokestacks, Kellogg, using a service vessel, towed the paddle wheeler from dry dock through Bay Lake beneath the monorail beam to the side canal beside the Magic Kingdom. In the days that followed, the stacks would be reassembled and the boat would be readied for guests. On the morning of September 27th, another dispute broke out between unions, this time between the Millwrights Union and a local subcontractor assigned to electrical work. As usual, the dispute involved who had jurisdiction over certain jobs, largely as a way of controlling billable hours. The problem quickly escalated into a wildcat strike, resulting in workers picketing across one of the few roads leading to the resort, just as the morning shift was arriving for work. Some workers still in their cars wouldn't cross the picket line in sympathy with the strikers. These events together resulted in a 3-mile traffic backup along I-4. Florida Highway Patrol dispersed the strikers, but by then, some workers were hours late to work, with hundreds of man-hours lost to the strike. Another issue Nunes knew was the monorails. Disney presently had 3 of the 6 trains it had ordered in operation. It was enough to carry preview groups from the ticket center to the Magic Kingdom, but not enough to support the park during regular operation. By themselves, these 3 trains could carry about 3,800 people per hour if fully loaded, which was likely not enough to satisfy demand. Beyond the monorail, Nunes had a fleet of boats, the largest of which at that time could only carry 300 people. If visitation patterns were similar to those at Disneyland, the Magic Kingdom would have thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands, wishing to enter the park during its first 2 hours of operation each day, and then thousands wishing to leave right when the park closed at 6 p.m. The current fleet of monorails and boats would likely create long lines at the start of the day and also at its close. To solve this problem, at least until more monorails came online, Nunes repurposed the parking lot trams, all of which were powered with stock tractors, to carry people from the main ticketing center over to the park, even though the tractors for this journey would need to power up a steep incline as the road moved beneath a water bridge. It wasn't an ideal solution, especially as the stock tractors were already leaking oil and suffering from vapor lock. But what other realistic option did he have? By the start of the last week of September, Roy Disney was back in Florida spending time with his wife Edna at the Bay Hill cottage. Among the Disney executives, he remained the most optimistic that the Magic Kingdom would be a large success from the moment it opened. He too had read reports in local papers projecting tens of thousands on opening day. But unlike other Disney executives, he believed large crowds were a likelihood. A large turnout would justify the tremendous investment his company had made in the resort and would again showcase his brother Walt as a visionary. Moreover, large crowds demonstrating the resort's success would free him to move into retirement, leaving the company in the hands of younger executives. In preparation for an expanded resort, Roy was scheduled to appear on September 28th at the Preview Center, along with representatives from the Howard Johnson Company to announce the joint venture of a 216-room high-rise hotel on land leased from Disney. But at the last minute, Roy and his wife Edna were called back to California. Quote, Roy had to leave, Don Tatum explained, because of a serious illness in his wife's family. He would be away from the resort for the final days leading up to its opening, and this too would place additional pressure on younger executives to ensure that preparations were in place so that opening day was a success, as though the transfer of power were coming slightly earlier than expected. At the press event, Roy was replaced by company vice president Don Tatum, who welcomed Howard Johnson's into the Disney family. Tatum said, quote, "We're very pleased to welcome another famous name to our host community development at Lake Buena Vista." For many executives, the absence of Roy during these final days solidified inevitable change. Many could see that the great man was now past his prime and that this final project, the opening of the resort named after his brother, was too large and too complex for a man in his late 70s. The last remnant of the Disney brothers was slowly leaving the company. Also, on the morning of September 28th, the Disney company revealed that despite aggressive advertising, they were still 600 employees short of their target for opening, with most vacancies in skilled kitchen work and in full-time custodial. Later that day, Cardwalker oversaw a meeting with roughly 800 salaried supervisors inside the theater for the Hall of Presidents. The meeting was initially arranged as a type of post-construction pre-opening celebration, though construction continued throughout the park. In the auditorium, cast members filled every seat, with some standing at the back as Walker stood at the front of the room. As opposed to other executives, particularly in contrast to Roy, Walker tended to dress casual, often in sports shirts and tennis shoes, as though he were trying to better relate to the younger managers around him. He talked about the days ahead, how the resort would change the Disney company, and also how much work remained until guests clicked through the turnstiles. Quote, "We wanted to thank them," Walker said. "They've performed superbly, and I wanted to tell them how proud I was of them." In this, before the gathered supervisors, he was beginning to take on a role once assumed by Roy, speaking as the voice of the company. After his comments, he stepped aside as cast members watched, for the first time, the mechanical forms of 37 presidents, from Washington through Nixon, rise into a type of life, creating through animatronics an event that couldn't be witnessed in real life. Quote, "It was a strongly moving event," Walker said. Jack Lindquist, who oversaw marketing, recalled that the very next day, quote, On September 29th, we awoke to headlines and radio reports that the head of the Florida State Troopers had released a statement predicting that we would attract 300,000 people on opening day and that all highways and interstates between Daytona Beach and Miami would be gridlocked. The report was almost surely the result of a typo, an extra zero added to the radio script. For weeks, 30,000 was the rough figure that the troopers had used to estimate average daily attendance at the Magic Kingdom. Inside Disney, if the park reached 30,000 on opening day, executives would pop open champagne and count that as a win. The projected number inside the Disney company was now half of 30,000. Quote, "We didn't respond to the forecast," Lindquist added. "Instead, we just went ahead with our plans." But Nunes saw that the marketing team started to feel a sickening anxiety over the reports. Quote, "The papers kept saying we were going to get 100,000 or 200,000 or 500,000. I think a Detroit paper picked 2 million. And if we didn't get that many people as they predicted, we'd close in a year. Now we're human. We read all those headlines and got terribly confused about what might really happen." Many of these reports were obviously unrealistic, but contingency plans were put in place to manage traffic and crowds in case a swarm of travelers descended on the resort. Disney itself hired 200 security guards for the event to ensure that the opening weekend, no matter how many guests arrived, went smoothly. Cast member Cheryl Samardzija recalled, quote, "Our supervisors told us to be ready for wall-to-wall people on opening day." One Disney official responded by telling the press that, quote, "We do not know whether to expect 5,000 or 50,000 for opening day." To one reporter, Charlie Ridgway revealed that there was now a plan in case more guests showed up than could comfortably fit in the park. Quote, "If attendance reaches the point where too many people turn out," he explained, "officials will turn the excess away." When pressed, he wouldn't comment on what would define an excessive number. Most executives understood that the underlying problem was one of optics. If it was believed that the resort might receive 30,000 or 35,000 guests, but then only 20,000 showed up, the resort would be viewed as an early failure. To combat this, Don Tatum told the press that no one at the company knew exactly how many people would attend opening day or even opening weekend. Quote, "We'll have to wait and see," he said. He also tried to reframe public expectations by pointing to Thanksgiving. Already, from internal room reservation data for November, Disney executives could see that the Thanksgiving holiday would present a more successful image of the resort than its opening weekend, and maybe even than that of the grand opening ceremonies at the end of the month. Quote, "The holiday weekend," Tatum said, "is when lots of people will travel from a distance, and this will be the criterion for us." Again, to refocus the attention of reporters, another Disney World spokesperson returned to the main point of the press conference to lower expectations for opening day. It will be focused, he said, on, quote, "getting freshly trained employees adjusted and familiar with their assignments and, in general, working out any kinks that may be discovered." Also that day, as if to rebuff the lower estimates now touted at Disney, the Highway Patrol held a 5-hour briefing to prepare for traffic problems on opening day. Quote, "Whatever entangling shape the congestion on the highways might take," one paper reported, "at least 19 additional troopers are to be in the vicinity to help control it. Area police and sheriff's departments wait in the wings to assist where needed." Beyond this, the 7 counties around Disney World required that over 100 Highway Patrol officers postpone any planned vacations until after the month of October in case they were needed to assist with road problems related to the resort. But still, papers continued to circulate numbers higher than those now arranged inside of the company. The Miami Herald reported that, quote, "about 30 to 35,000 people are expected to show up." This was slightly higher than the recently revised figure now used in government circles. The Florida Highway Patrol was expecting, quote, "between 20,000 and 28,000. But inside of Disney, the number hovered between 12,000 and 14,000. Some executives hoped for 20,000, but this was on the high end. Over at the resort itself, by 2 in the afternoon, people were arriving in hopes of lining up for the Magic Kingdom. Disney security, along with a few state troopers, were stationed on the Disney-owned road that led to the entrance. They told those interested that the resort would not open until the following morning. Most cars simply turned away, but some lined up on Route 192, hopeful to be among the first to enter the parking lot. Again sensing that perhaps their internal estimates were too low, Disney made a planning decision to open the monorail and also the gates to the Magic Kingdom at least 2 hours early. If large crowds did in fact materialize, some managers, quote, feared a backlog of opening day guests, with perhaps thousands stretched out from ticket windows as new employees worked with paying guests for the first time. Though this early opening wouldn't be announced to guests, a note went out to cast members informing them that, quote, with anticipation of early arrivals, we'll open the main entrance at 7 a.m., which was then located at the Ticket and Transportation Center, and the theme park at 8 a.m., which had a separate set of turnstiles and gates. The continued reports of high crowds also produced one additional complication. For weeks, reporters and news photographers had requested preview tours of the park, though Disney had ushered in civic and community groups. Charlie Ridgway, head of promotions and press relations, had kept reporters, or at least most reporters, at bay, though now this was becoming an issue for some large circulation magazines such as Time. On the afternoon of September 30th, Ridgway stopped by the Polynesian to check on the conference room he had reserved the following day for the press. He was stunned at what he found. Quote, "It was horrible," he explained. "There were bare light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, no carpeting on the floor, no wallpaper, no phones. I just lost it. I blew up and told the crew that reporters were coming the next morning, and this room wasn't even close to being finished." From there, Ridgway drove to the Hilton Inn South, where reporters from Time, Newsweek, the New York Times, Washington Post, and other news outlets were gathered. Ridgway did his best to manage their expectations for what they'd see the following day, including that some hotel areas wouldn't be ready for the public for roughly a month. But then some reporters again asked for a pre-opening tour to watch as cast members prepared to debut it to the world. They also wanted to photograph it without crowds blocking their sightlines. It was a concession, a way to start the day on a positive note, even if the press room still looked like hell later in the day. "Okay," Ridgway finally agreed, "I'll meet you at 6 a.m. at the Polynesian Village Hotel press room." In the Magic Kingdom, construction crews put up temporary wood walls to close off areas and attractions not yet finished. Quote, "The afternoon before the opening of the Magic Kingdom," explained one manager, "I was on the lawn in front of Cinderella Castle laying sod. 2 hours later, I was washing windows in the castle. An hour after that, I was training kids how to jump Autopia cars." At the Polynesian, managers helped lay carpet to finish at least some areas of the hotel, including the room where the press would gather the following morning. Over at the Contemporary, teams removed construction equipment from the exterior of the building to give the impression, largely for press photographers, that the hotel was far more finished than it was. Quote, "On Thursday, giant cranes still rose high above the Contemporary Hotel, which would have spoiled the appearance for first-time visitors," Charlie Ridgway explained. "The offending cranes were taken down for the inaugural weekend." A decision was made to halt most of the work on the exterior of the Contemporary for 3 days, as guests and press photographers moved through the park. The cranes wouldn't go up again until the following Monday. Another decision was made to arrange the monorails so that very few guests would pass through the interior of the Contemporary. In the morning, the monorail trains would run from the Ticket Center to the Polynesian, then the Magic Kingdom. In the afternoon and evening, their direction would be reversed, taking guests from the Magic Kingdom to the Polynesian to the Ticket Center. Though a few guests might move through the interior of the Contemporary, the vast majority, and more importantly, the vast majority of the press, would not. For cast members, Roy Disney, though he remained in California, released a note that was distributed around the property. Quote, "On the eve of Walt Disney World's opening day," he wrote, "may I thank you all for your spirit, your cooperation, and the fine job all of you have done in getting ready for our opening. Years of planning and long hours of work have brought about this historic moment. It will be an experience none of us will forget. At this time, I think it is appropriate that we remember Walt's comment. You can dream, design, and build the most wonderful place in the world, but it requires people to make the dream a reality. You, the cast, are responsible for making Walt's dream come true, yesterday, today, and tomorrow." Late in the day, another bulletin was sent to Disney World cast members called Flash from 4500. Quote, "Planning began in 1965. Now, $400 million and 6 years later and untold gallons of blood, sweat, and tears, the public will visit this most ambitious creation in the history of the Disney organization. It will be a great and memorable day for all of us. This does not mean that it won't have its frantic, hectic, confusing moments. If your costume doesn't fit, a tram breaks down, and other things don't happen like they should, don't get uptight. That, as they say, is show business." But large parts of the show were nowhere near ready to go on. In the Magic Kingdom, Bill Justice and other wet engineers rushed to finish Country Bear Jamboree. Quote, "Jack Taylor and I worked on the Bear Band till about 2 a.m. the night before opening day. There was a guy in there who was still painting gold leaf on some of the trim around the stage." Out on the entrance road, security guards continued to tell first-day hopefuls that the resort wouldn't open until morning. At one point, security was turning away over, quote, 200 cars an hour, with a handful of those guests now planning to camp out on Route 192 until morning. It was largely college students and young adults, some of whom brought six-packs of beer and sleeping bags. At one point, officers told those parked along the road that they needed to leave. Many moved their cars to a rest stop along I-4 and to empty parking lots on neighboring streets. Just before midnight, one woman insisted that she be let in as she was Cinderella and simply returning to her castle. Once Disney security understood that this was not a prank and that, in fact, she was either mentally ill or suffering from hallucinations, they radioed the sheriff's department for assistance. But the most famous and most often repeated story about that night belonged to Dick Nunis and his last-minute work with the Contemporary Hotel. On opening day, the Contemporary Tower wasn't available to guests, but hotel manager Alan Hupst explained that a few garden wing rooms were occupied by actual guests, but only those, quote, with long-standing reservations. The Contemporary was so underprepared for guests that those in garden wings found that the primary transportation from the hotel around construction equipment to the park was by bus. Because of the danger, guests weren't allowed to walk, but the hotel in its present state presented another problem. Its grand form would be visible to guests and reporters, particularly those arriving to the Magic Kingdom by boat. Because of its size, no doubt photographers would point their lenses in its direction. Nunis knew that a positive visual image of the resort was essential. A beautiful resort enticed viewers to book future vacations. An unsightly resort might keep potential visitors away for years. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Nunis and the landscape architect Bill Evans arrived at the Contemporary Hotel to find large sections of the ground still bare. The Contemporary looked like a massive building dropped on a beach. Nunes saw that the 3 long-reach cranes, once positioned around the hotel, had lowered their jibs and booms, creating the illusion of a slightly more finished structure. But he also knew that even from a distance, the site would look better with greenery. Evans estimated that they would need to plant nearly 5 acres of sod in a few hours to make the hotel look presentable, like something other than a tan slab of concrete rising up out of sand that was nearly the same color. Quote, "Given the timetable, most everyone thought it an impossible task," one reporter later observed. Everyone but Nunes. He made the calls to have the sod trucked in, hired about 100 extra men, none of whom knew anything about laying sod, and grabbed anybody else that was standing around. At least some of the extra workers were students at nearby Rollins College. Under work lights and even the headlights of cars, Nunes pitched in with the boys, rolling up his sleeves and tossing squares of sod. Quote, "The men were so inexperienced, we had to tell them to lay the sod green side up," Nunes explained. He worked well past midnight, his clothes dark with sweat, his voice growing hoarse. Evans recalled that as new people joined the efforts, Nunes started chanting directions in military tones. "Okay, men," he called, "remember, green side up, come on, you can do it, green side up, let's go." Sometime after midnight, Nunes and Evans surveyed the area and understood they didn't have enough sod nor enough men to finish the job. Quote, "Bill Evans drew a big circle," Nunes recalled, and said, "We'll leave this bare. People will think it's a planter." Around 4 a.m., they believed the area was done. At least it was good enough for opening day. Both Nunes and Evans knew that this land would need to be formally landscaped before video cameras arrived at the end of the month to film the official opening ceremonies. Some, maybe even most, of this hastily laid sod would need to be pulled up, but it was good enough for right now. Nunes now needed to change and prepare for opening day. As he would later explain, he knew that, quote, "We were not ready to open, but time had run out." I'll be back next Sunday to continue this story with an episode that details how opening day played out at the Magic Kingdom, a park that wasn't entirely ready to open, a management team that was missing its leader, Roy Disney, and a group of younger executives that worked not only to open this unique resort, but to manage its image to protect the value of the company. Things didn't go exactly as planned, but more on that next Sunday. As you probably know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. Without subscribers, we'd simply cease to exist. If you've been enjoying these episodes, if you find them a meaningful part of your week, please support us by becoming a monthly subscriber over on Bandcamp. On Bandcamp, you'll find dozens and dozens of extra episodes. But the best reason to subscribe is to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can subscribe at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Until then, this is Todd James Pierce.